For those in the chambers, you do not need to use the microphones tonight, so if you can make sure those are off. We are now actually.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the meeting for the work session for the Wildwood City Council for Monday, April 13, 2020. Could you please call the roll?
Mayor Bolin,
Here.
Councilmember Stevens,
Here.
Councilmember McCune,
Here.
Councilmember Bope,
Present.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell, present, Councilmember Remy, Councilmember Edens,
Here.
Councilmember Brost,
Here.
Councilmember Garitano,
Present.
Councilmember Werther,
Present.
Councilmember Jordan. She's here. Councilmember Jordan,
Here. Am I not heard?
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Sorry, I must have been on mute. I'm here.
Here.
Cheryl.
Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember Dillard,
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Here.
Councilmember Greg Nani.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Please,
And
I was heard, Colleen.
we got you.
We got you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to welcome all of you. A little bit differently than we have in the past. And I just want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, I'm coming to you from City Hall with our city team members who are with me, our city administrator, city attorney, and our director of planning and parks. And I want to thank our city team members for getting all this together. And thanks to all of you for doing the run-throughs to make this possible. We also have, for the first time, a couple of student interpreters who will be signing our meetings this evening for those who are hearing impaired. And the last thing is members of the public are free to join this meeting, but because there is no public participation or hearing for the work session, they will be participants by observing only. So the council members will be those who will be allowed to speak on the Zoom meeting, just like we do when we are in session. Moving to informational items, we have 5 before we go to action items. As we always do, is there any member of the council who wishes to discuss or have a question about any of the items on the information section of the work session agenda? All right, seeing none.
Mayor, you do have a hand raised down at the bottom.
Sorry, I was muted too, so.
Okay, I'll get you next. I'll get you next, Councilmember Werther. Councilmember Stevens.
Get questions for Mr. Vunich. First, how many respondents have we got for the Village Green survey?
I talked with Kathy Arnett this morning, and I believe we're just under 150.
I'm sorry. I talked with Kathy Arnett this morning, and I believe we're just under 150 in total. And the plan is to keep the survey open to April 22nd.
Okay, and then on the calendar for the Music on Main for May, even if the county lifts the stay-at-home order and we plan on having the concert, are there any changes that you plan on making as far as handing out the drinks and the sodas and things like that?
Obviously, if St. Louis County Department of Health were to say we could have a larger gathering, we'd have to seek their guidance on almost everything. I truly believe, Councilmember Stevens, that May concert will probably not occur.
Okay. And then last thing, have you seen any problems with shutting down the parking lots for the trails? Have people been parking on the streets or anything, or how's that been going?
It's a very fluid situation, Councilmember Stevens. The first step, which occurred a week ago this past weekend, was to close many of the trailhead parking lots. We were seeing a great number of people there, which is great, but they were not practicing social distancing.
Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is this on the agenda for this evening? Is it in the agenda?
I don't know, sir. It was not a report I prepared.
Okay, so Councilmember Stevens, we're going to go ahead and let Joe finish, but we can't, for sunshine law purposes, veer off the agenda with items that aren't on it. So Joe, why don't you finish that, and let's please keep that in mind as we go forward. Thank you.
My apology, Mr. Mayor. Just to say that we did it in two phases. We closed the trailheads. That pushed everybody to the school lots, LaSalle Institute, and onto the street. We made some changes over this weekend to better control the school lots, which are also trying to encourage social distancing. And we've received some positive responses via our social media, as well as some negative.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Councilmember Werther.
Thank you. Mr. Vunich, back to the Village Green study and the update for the public input. Item 2, you talk about a change instead of lasting only 2 hours for a public input session to going to a 7 to 10 day, depending on participation. Can you, and I know you didn't really get into a lot of details about how that would go, if that 7 to 10 days is a set time every day over the 7 to 10 days to have public input sessions, or is it online? How is it? How are you planning on doing that, or is that something still to be discussed?
It's not something that needs to be discussed, Councilmember Werther. What we're finding is that all of the information, I should say what we've done is all of the information is available online and through our different media outlets. We actually are extending it to the longer time frame. And the rationale is that in a single meeting held on one night, oftentimes the best you can expect is maybe 50 to 100 people to attend. At least that's been the pattern here in Wildwood. This way, we're already almost at 150. So we're getting more input, and the thought was extend the time frame. And it is all available online on our city's website. You can connect via the social media, and we put out information about it in our e-newsletter as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously you'll take the opportunity to publicize it a couple times through e-newsletter to make sure you get enough responses, right?
Yes, sir. And we also did a little video on YouTube. We're going to boost that, and hopefully over the next 8 to 10 days, we'll see what I hope is another maybe 50 or 60 people participate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Joe, I just wanted to compliment you guys on working with the consulting firm for putting together that survey. I think we're actually going to collect more significant data from our residents because they'll have an opportunity to, instead of vocalize, actually pick specific pieces of components that they want in that park and things that they want to have laid out for them. And so I think this is, while different than the last park that we did, going to give us an effective set of information for what our residents really want. So I want to applaud you and the consulting firm for working within the tight constraints that we have right now. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words, Councilmember Dodwell. And it's more human nature than Joe Vunich, so I'll make that statement first and foremost. But the nice thing about the online component is they added a couple of extra exercises. There's a form you can fill out and kind of be creative with it. And so I think at the end of the day, it may never be a complete substitute for one-on-one, face-to-face, but I think it's going to get us over the hump so we can continue forward with the momentum we've built.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak to any item on the agenda under information before we go to action items? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you for those questions. Moving into action, we have two items. The first from the Department of Planning and Parks relating to the Birch Forest Drive turnaround. Joe, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At some point in this presentation, we'll use this share screen option, so there'll be a graphic that's available to describe what I'm going to speak to. As is noted in the report that was provided as part of tonight's work session packet, there is a current street, Birch Forest Drive, that was constructed in the 1980s. It was a stub street that was intended to be extended into future development. That future development ended up being the Villages at Brightleaf. During the discussion of the Villages at Brightleaf during the zoning process, it became clear that many of the residents in the vicinity were concerned about extension of stub streets. Therefore, there was a decision made not to extend Birch Forest Drive into the Villages at Brightleaf. What that meant is that cul-de-sac with the temporary turnaround would become more permanent in nature. At the time of the zoning process, the Department of Planning did note that the temporary components could be removed and restored, but what that would lead to is not adequate space for larger vehicles to turn around. The residents ultimately agreed to just retain what they had and not change the status quo, so to speak. It became obvious as time went on that there needed to be a more permanent solution, just from the standpoint of safety, accessibility, and just aesthetics as well. The Planning and Parks Committee authorized the investigation of a more permanent turnaround facility that would be constructed in the Villages at Brightleaf on common ground that would be dedicated or granted an easement to the city of Wildwood for this purpose. Over the course of time, a preliminary plan was developed, and ultimately, as you can see tonight, bidding documents were completed, all under the direction of the Planning and Parks Committee. During the budget process in the fall of 2019, this particular project came forward. Rick Brown, our Director of Public Works, and the Department of Planning were involved in that discussion. And ultimately, City Council decided to not fund it immediately at the start of the new fiscal year, but to complete the bidding documents, which has now been accomplished, eventually bid it, and then see what the bids were in terms of cost, and ultimately move toward a potential contract, and do all of this by the time we went to mid-year budgets. Ms. McCutcheon, the council representative from Ward 5, identified a potential source of funding, which is the traffic generation assessment fees that are collected on new projects within the city of Wildwood. This particular project location is in what is described the East Fund, and the dividing line is State Route 109. Over the course of the last several years, we've collected over $600,000 in TGA funds for the East area or East Fund location. So money is available to complete this project at this time, and that money would not come from operating or capital, but from TGA funds collected at the Villages at Brightleaf, Main Street Crossing, Wildwood Trails, Stone Mill, etc. So there is funding available from a different source than typical. The engineer has provided a bid. That bid is approximately $75,000 for the work to be completed. It does not include the landscaping component, nor the restoration of the two lots where the temporary turnaround is located. That would probably add an additional $5,000 to $10,000. Again, well within the funding amount that exists in the East Fund of the Traffic Generation Assessment Fee. So tonight, the departments are presenting to the City Council for consideration this particular project and is seeking direction to proceed forward with the bidding process or to continue to wait to mid-year before making a decision in this regard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe, for that report. Councilmember Dodwell.
Thank you, Joe. Quick question for you. If you were going to go out to the bidding process, would that also include a second item, which would be the beautification and the restoration activities that need to occur? I'd want to make sure that we pulled up the old street and finished the project off all in one, if that's at all possible. With the TGA funds you're describing, it sounds like there would be enough funding in that.
Yes, ma'am. And the hope of the department, in fact, its plan is to do exactly what you described, to combine the engineering component with the landscape plan, and then a simple set of specifications that I believe our Department of Public Works come up with for the removal of the temporary turnaround and its restoration.
Thank you, Joe. Having lived on a street that was sort of a stubbed street when we first moved into Wildwood, I know what it means to be able to have your road finished, so to speak, and then have some additional components added to it to make it look hospitable to not only the residents, but the visitors. So I would certainly be in favor of including those components as part of the overall project.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other questions for Joe? Councilmember McCune.
Joe or anyone else that can answer this. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, so the TGA funds that you described in the funding amount we currently have, what other projects do we need to do in light of this one for the rest of that money that we have in those funds currently?
And Mr. Brown may want to add to this, but I believe we've used TGA for the Route 109 improvements, and we've used it for the Manchester Road Streetscape Phase 3 improvements. And certainly there's opportunities out there relative to projects that are kind of in the queue, meaning the roundabout at the southern end of Route BA and Route 109, and possible changes in the vicinity of Manchester Road and Route 109. So there's always projects, but from the perspective of the department, as I noted in the report, almost $265,000 of that total amount was collected in the villages at Brightleaf for the approximately 120 dwellings that have been permitted. So it would be using the money in the area where it was collected, so to speak.
Okay, I was in favor of this when we started this discussion, and I think that we, like your memo had stated, we would look at it mid-year to see where we're at. And I just think that the temperature, what we're going into now, and I think that's a further discussion for another meeting agenda, that I'm just concerned from the expense purposes that while I'd like to move this forward, I just don't think I can support it until we understand where we're at budget-wise with the COVID issue that's going forward right at this time. I'm not opposed to it, but trying to reserve where we can is, I think, important for us to evaluate at this time.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Councilmember Grignani.
Yeah, that goes to a question that I was going to ask. I think I already know the answer, but I want to be sure. I assume that this money can only be used for traffic and road issues and is not part of any operating budget. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. When it's collected, it's for infrastructure improvements, principally, as you say, roadways, sidewalks, trails, stormwater facilities in the right-of-way, et cetera.
So it couldn't be shifted to a general operating budget even if we wanted to. Is that correct?
Under the enabling ordinance for the traffic generation assessment fee, I believe that to be the case, sir.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to grant the the department the permission to move forward with the bidding process, the construction of the Birch Forest turnaround, and to utilize the TGA East fund for the budget cost.
Okay, so we have a
To get
motion.
all that.
I think we did. I'll repeat it as I understood it. Councilmember McCutcheon, it is to move forward with the bidding process, and depending upon the outcome of that, if it moves forward further, to use the applicable TGA funds that's been discussed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
We have a second by Councilmember Bertolino. So discussion is on the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Bartoni?
Thank you. So Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is already scheduled or proposed to be scheduled for 2021 already, correct?
Again, Councilmember Bartoni, the discussion I recall from the budget process in 2019 for this year, it was to be reviewed at the mid-year of 2020 to kind of gauge where our funds were. At that time, you were thinking it was more of a capital project, not one that would be funded through the TGA.
Gotcha. Okay, and thank you for that. So, you know, a couple other projects that you mentioned, I can certainly appreciate trying to use the money in the neighborhood that it was generated in, but I would say that most of those residents within the village of Brightleaf are also going to be driving on 109 at one time or another. And a couple of the other projects you mentioned for 109 would not only benefit those residents, but also residents throughout the city. So I kind of echo what Crystal said earlier. I mean, I wasn't against this project by any means, but just with the current climate, I'm just not going to be able to support moving this up. But I just think it would send a very bad message for us to add items to our expenses during this, pandemic.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry. Councilmember Stevens.
Yeah, so this was discussed at the end of the last year's budget, and we talked about possibly like putting off the Etherton Road project and then funding this instead, but that didn't pass. And so it's already scheduled for 2021. I believe, if I remember correctly, City Administrator Anselm said that in a private conversation, but the city could be looking at anywhere from 10 to 70% reduction in revenue. And with that amount of funds not available for the rest of the year, I just don't see how we can move it up. If we wanted to move it up, I think we should have done it at the end of last year. So I really just, I would love to do it, but without the funding being available for the rest of this year and being uncertain, I can't support it.
Councilmember Remy.
Quick question for you, Joe. So these funds for infrastructure, when you talk about infrastructure, and I understand that this probably wasn't delineated at the time when the TGA was fully appreciated and originated, but does infrastructure include potential for watershed and stream erosion that may exist in those areas where those developments have begun?
Councilmember Remy, I believe it does within the context of the right-of-way, the public street. And as you know, those are impervious surfaces. They generate a lot of runoff, which goes to the natural system. So there probably could be some applications, particularly in those bioretention, detention and retention areas that capture water from the right-of-way.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yeah, a couple of points to make. The request to utilize this for the turnaround is exactly what TGA funds were designed to do. The Villages of Brightleaf has approximately 60 more lots to develop, and at that time we'll get roughly $2,000 for each one of those lots. It's going to be $126,000 in addition to what we already have in TGA. It's not part of revenue. It's not an extra project. It's also a safety concern as people are driving through what was to be the emergency access. So they're getting out, taking the signs, moving the barriers, and then driving through there. And that's not what it was meant for. We were looking, when this discussion happened earlier in the year, the discussion was if there was funds available elsewhere, then this would be a good project to go ahead and move forward. Residents have been waiting for 3 years for this to come to a resolution. All the woods, the trees, the undergrowth have all been cut down, and there is drainage there now. It's going into the creek. There's runoff from the way it is currently graded, and this would correct that issue as well. So on behalf of the residents of Ward 5, I'd really appreciate if you go ahead and vote to utilize the TGA funds. Again, this is a perfect project for that use of those fundings. It's not going to take away from anything else. It's not going to add concern, I don't think, from residents when this is the money that is appropriated to TGA funds, and that's exactly what we're using it for, and you can't use it for anything else. So I would appreciate it if some of those of you who are saying you don't think it's a good time at this point to reconsider. Thank you.
Councilmember Farmer.
I'm good. I think everybody else kind of asked my questions.
Okay. Councilmember Dodwell.
I'm okay.
Okay.
Question answered.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Garitano.
Sure. Just a clarification question. And this was mentioned in the motion here about using of the TGA funds. So this is following up on a question that Councilmember Gragnani asked before. And I believe you clarified that TGA funds are limited to what they can be used. Are TGA funds also calculated when we refer to the city's reserves, or are they considered separate?
City Administrator Anselm, would you like to answer that?
So the TGA funds are considered a separate funding source, apart from the general fund as well as the others. So even though we did not budget any expenditures for this calendar year, we do have about $600,000 in reserve that would be available. It would require council approval though, since it is an unbudgeted.
Okay, so thank you for asking that. So just to make sure I understand correctly, TGA funds are not considered part of the reserve. They're a separate fund.
Correct.
All right. Thank you for answering my question.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other, I'm sorry, Councilmember
Stevens as well.
Couldn't find the unmute button, sorry. Part of this was already answered, which was, how we went from a proposed $75,000 expenditure during budget negotiations, which we moved to mid-year, to reconsidering the TGA as a possible funding source. And maybe that's just more creative. I'm not sure why that wasn't proposed originally, but that's okay. My thought is with mid-year and waiting is I understand what you're saying, that this is a separate funding that can only be used for these types of projects, but when we may need to spend on road construction again on 109, 100, maybe we need to reduce our budgeted amount and take more from the TGA because we have less money to spend. Is that a correct assumption, Rick? If that money exists in the TGA still, it's more flexible, which is why, wait till, I support waiting till mid-year. In fact, I'll go ahead and put a motion on the floor to postpone review until mid-year, as originally stated, regardless of the funding stream.
Okay, so we have a motion to postpone until the mid-year review. Is there a second to the motion? Second by Councilmember McCune. So the discussion is on the motion to postpone. Is there any discussion on the motion to postpone? Seeing no discussion, Councilmember Stevens. Can you unmute your, Councilmember Stevens? We're not hearing you. If you can unmute your.
Gotcha. Unmute now. So I'm sorry, motion is to postpone until mid-year?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, regardless of whether it comes from TGA or budget, just in general.
Okay. Well, one, just clarification, the TGA funds are part of the reserves. When you look at the.
Councilmember Stevens, the discussion is on the motion to postpone. Do you favor postponement or not?
Well, even if it happens at mid-year, it's still, you're still spending reserves, whether it happens at mid-year or you're doing it right now. A TGA fund still counts towards the total revenues for the city. And so when you look at the budget and you count up all the revenues minus all the expenditures, you have an unreserved fund balance at the end. That's where the money's coming from, is from the unreserved fund balance, whether it comes from TGA, capital improvements, anywhere else, all that, that's a big pool of money that is unreserved funds. So yes, it is absolutely part of the reserves. And to sit here and to plan on spending reserves during a pandemic when we are going to lose a very large percent of the revenue is, it's irresponsible. So I would make an amendment to just postpone indefinitely.
Okay, so we have a motion to postpone on the floor. Any other discussion on the motion to postpone?
Motion to can I make the amendment to postpone it, I guess, until the end of year discussions for the next year's budget? Because it's already in the next year's budget.
You can make that motion. You would like to postpone it to when again, Councilmember Stevens?
Just postpone till it's due for the 2021 budget. It's already in the budget for 2021 in the 5-year capital improvement plan.
So that would be in December of this year, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That is correct. Is there a second to the motion by Councilmember Stevens to postpone to the first meeting of the council in December of this year?
Second.
We have a second.
From Councilmember Worthy.
So now
the discussion will be on the amendment to the motion to postpone to the tentative time and
discussion on the date of postponing to December. Seeing no discussion, Ms. Lobeck, please call the roll. And this vote is only on the date of the motion to postpone for clarification.
Mayor, I did raise my hand. You didn't call on me.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Councilmember Rooney.
So just for clarification, in this grandstanding pure hubris that's just been presented, which is pure ridiculousness, and I'll state it for the record, we will
I think we lost it.
Into the beginning of the fall. We're going to actually address this in mid-year, and you could actually push that information to the actual budget for the next year if that's what the council wants to do. The timing would be about the same. We would only vote on it in December if we pushed it to next year's budget. However, the discussion could still occur over the summertime.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak relative, Councilmember McCutcheon?
Yeah, Councilmember Edens brought up the point that the funding could be used for Highway 109. We have used TGA funding before for roundabouts and so forth, but Highway 109 and Highway 100 belongs to MoDOT. It doesn't belong to the city of Wildwood. These are two streets that actually belong to the city of Wildwood.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
again,
are you speaking?
This is funding that we have. This is what it's designed to use for. We're not increasing revenue. We're not adding to the budget deficit. So I'm not in favor of.
Okay, so I just want to remind everyone, and Councilmember McCutcheon, the discussion is on the date of the postponement, which is to December, as currently on the floor for the amendment on the motion to postpone.
Speaking again.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Garitano.
Yeah, I have a question. It's I guess more or less a point of information, but it was brought up in the amendment that Councilmember Stevens brought up. And so, hold on, we got interruption here. So my point of information, and again, maybe this is something that the city administrator can clarify, but it was brought up again by Councilmember Stevens that the TGA funds are considered part of the reserve. So I'd like to get the question answered. Are the TGAs part of the reserve?
So no, TGA funds each have their own separate accounts. We have a West TGA fund and an East TGA fund. And both of those are treated essentially like a separate entity. So they're not part of our general fund. They're not part of our capital improvements fund. They're their own separate fund that exists for the purpose of those types of improvements.
So to be very clear, I want to make sure, and I'm right now, I support the amendment that Councilmember Edens has made right now to postpone to mid-year. But just to be clear of what you've said, City Administrator, the TGA funds are not considered part of the general fund reserve. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so seeing no further hands, the motion on the floor is, I'm sorry, Councilmember Werther, did you want to speak? I saw your hand.
Yeah, I'm going to get into a little bit of a point of order. I thought Councilmember Remy decided to go ahead and impugn some of what Councilmember Stevens said. And I thought, Mayor, you've been very good about that in some cases and not so good in others. And I wanted to point that out here. The fact of the matter is that reserves are reserves, whether they're TGA reserves, whether they're general fund reserves. It's all dollars one way or another. So yes, let's postpone this. Let's save every dollar we can.
So Councilmember Werther, thank you for making that point. I don't know if all of you were unable to hear Councilmember Remy for the first part, almost half of what he was saying, but I was unable to hear him. But I definitely appreciate you bringing such things to the forefront. So is there anyone else who wishes to speak before we vote on the amendment? Councilmember Stevens.
And just to be clear on this, these TGA funds could be used for watershed. They could be used for Etherton Road, possibly Woods Road.
This out of order. This is debate. Councilmember Stevens, this is debate only on the date. It is not debate on the merits of what the funds can be used for. I'm sorry.
Then, okay, also on the date then, okay. So for 2020, the date, we already have all these projects scheduled that could be used for the East TGA funds could be used for these projects. Is that correct? I guess question for Rick or Joe.
I'm going to let Rick answer that one.
I believe you said there's always projects. There's always projects. These TGA funds.
Let's get his answer. Rick, can you please answer Councilmember Stevens?
I might defer to Sam, frankly, but sure, we have numerous projects we're working on. We have numerous that are on our capital improvements program that could potentially be funded by using these funds.
Okay,
these are, and just point of order, these are, it's not that they're part of the general reserve funds, the operating contingency for those, but any funds that are not budgeted are considered reserve funds, unreserved fund balance. So it doesn't matter which fund they're part of, it's an unreserved fund balance.
Councilmember Jordan.
I'm going to keep my comments simple because I think I'm having some internet challenges. I'm only hearing parts, like you said, of Councilmember Remy. I missed part of what he said. However, I'm sorry, did you need to interrupt me?
I do,
my apology. I just want to mention
the date is only on, it must be only on the date.
I understand. I understand. Can I have 2 minutes to make a comment? There's been a lot of talk and I don't know why I need to be interrupted on it. All I wanted to say is that I'm going to vote for a delay. I like Councilmember Eden's delay, but I like Councilmember Stevens more. I put out an article to try and get discussion at this meeting about the fact that we've got potentially a real budget crisis coming along. And I don't feel like in good spirit, I can vote to spend money that's budgeted for next year. I just can't. Thank you.
Thank you.
And my apology for interrupting Councilmember Jordan. I just have to keep the procedure of the meeting according to the rules. So my apology for having to do that.
Councilmember Greg Nani, before I call on you, Councilmember McCune mentioned if any of you have your microphones on unmute, if you could please mute them because apparently there's getting to be a fair amount of feedback. Thank you. Councilmember Greg Nani.
Thank you. I just have a question for clarification. This can go to Rick or Joe, I suppose, or even Sam. If we had an emergency, say, for example, that a bridge were to collapse on one of the roads, could these funds be used to repair that bridge in an emergency situation?
City Administrator Hanson, do you want to answer that?
Perhaps I would be more inclined in an emergency type of situation to use general fund reserves for that project, given that our budget for our capital improvements is smaller than our general fund. So I would obviously have a conversation with Director Vunich and Director Brown in that instance, but without knowing a specific location of a bridge, you know, if it would occur, I would prefer that we have a discussion about using reserve funds out of our general fund for that.
Okay, so seeing no further, no one else wishing to speak, the motion on the floor is an amendment to the motion to postpone this motion to be considered at the first meeting of the council in December. So it is the date, not the motion to postpone specifically. If this passes or not, either way, we will come back to the motion to postpone as it was originally stated. So this is only as to the date. Ms. Loback, would you please call the roll of the council? And an affirmative vote is to postpone to the first meeting in December.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
No.
Councilmember Bope,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino, Councilmember Bertolino,
I'm sorry, Councilmember Bertolino, we didn't hear you. Can you unmute your screen? No, you voted no.
no. Councilmember Dodwell,
No.
Councilmember Remy,
No.
Councilmember Edens,
No.
Councilmember Brost,
No.
Councilmember Garitano,
No.
Councilmember Werther,
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
I'm sorry, yes. Councilmember McCutcheon,
No. No.
Councilmember Farmer,
No.
Councilmember Dillard,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
No.
Councilmember Greg Nani.
Yes.
So the amendment to the motion to postpone fails. So now we're back to the main, I'm sorry, we're back to the motion to postpone the main motion to the mid-year review of the budget by the council. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, Ms. Lobeck, please call the roll of the council. And this is on the motion to postpone the main motion on the turnaround to the mid-year budget review meeting of the council.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Pope, Councilmember Pope,
Oh, hold on.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
No.
Councilmember Dodwell, Councilmember Dodwell,
No.
Councilmember Gross, I'm sorry, Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Prost,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Worther,
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember McCutcheon,
No.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Dillard,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Grignani,
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion to postpone carries. That takes us to the next of the two items for action from our Department of Public Works relating to removal, treatment, replacement of ash trees. Rick, if you could please, the council, I guess, a little background on what you're looking for them to do this evening relative to this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it. Council members, this item is relative to the expected demise of our ash trees. As many of you probably are very much aware, we are facing a pest in the city of Wildwood called the emerald ash borer. It's infesting our trees. It came to us from Asia. It was first discovered in Detroit in 2002, and basically it's expected to kill all of our ash trees located on our street right away, but also obviously on private property as well. This request applies really only to the street trees on our public streets throughout the city of Wildwood. Because we expect to see the loss of our street trees, our ash street trees in the next coming years, we've engaged the company Davy Resource Group. And I believe Andy Berg is on the line or with us as well to help address any questions you may have. Davy has worked with the department to develop a strategy with how best to address the death of all these ash trees over the next, say, expected 3 to 5 years or thereabouts. This issue was presented a couple times to the Edmond Public Works Committee, most recently in February. At the February meeting, we discussed a strategy moving forward that would include a treatment option, so not just removal and replacement of trees, but actually treating trees. There is a viable chemical option out there in the marketplace that allows us to treat trees. They have to be treated every other year on an every other year basis. But it is effective and it is viable. Some cities have chosen to go that direction. So that was the direction the committee provided at the February meeting, was to provide a strategy that included removal, replacement, as well as treatment of our street trees. So to move forward with that, we developed a RFP, request for proposals, that was submitted to a number of tree contractors. I believe that went out in March. And we asked for pricing from tree contractors for tree removal, replanting, as well as treatment. We do have around 1,300 to 1,350 ash trees remaining on our right-of-way. So this program would get prices from contractors to address those remaining trees. So I think we provided you that pricing information. I don't know if Sam or Jillian can pull that up on the screen, but we did provide you that information, the bids that were submitted by the 5 tree contractors. So the recommendation tonight that we prepared to the council was to move forward with city contractor agreements with 3 contractors. First being Timberline for tree removal, stump grinding, and debris removal. The second agreement would be with Arbor Masters for treatment of ash trees. And the third would be an agreement with Omni for tree planting. We do have, by the way, in our budget for 2020, $75,000 in the capital projects fund that we earmarked for EAB, Emerald Ash Borer improvements for 2020. So what we would be proposing would be to move forward with work treating trees as well as removing trees in 2020. So the treatment would comprise work of treating about 199 of 394 trees for about just under 25,000. And the removals would consist of removing about 190 of our worst ash trees for just over $50,000. The combined cost of the two would be right at $75,000. We don't have funds because of our limited budget for this year identified yet for replanting. We'd hope to identify potentially trim grants for that purpose potentially later in the year. But for now, we don't have any plans to do any specific replanting for ash tree replacement for 2020. Again, the recommendation is to move forward with these 3 contracts with the 3 bidders that proposed to our RFP and move forward with, for 2020, the removal of 190 trees as well as the treatment of 199 ash trees to not exceed the $75,000 that we have budgeted in our capital improvement program. Obviously, this all started more or less as the COVID-19 virus was starting to arrive on the scene. So that's kind of been evolving simultaneously. But the recommendation to you tonight is to move forward. And if there is a approval of the recommendation by the council, we'll bring the legislation to you at a subsequent meeting for these city contractor agreements. Again, I'm available for any questions. Andy Berg with City Resource Group is with us as well. If you have any specific questions, I'll defer to Andy.
So thank you, Rick. So for clarification, you're asking for approval of $74,912.50. Is that correct?
That money is already in our capital improvements program. So from that standpoint, it's already approved, Mr. Mayor. It's really we're asking for approval to move forward with the legislation for the city contractor agreements to do the work under that budget authorization.
And would that be the total of what you're asking that contract to be for?
The contract for 2020, the contracts would not exceed $75,000.
Okay, thank you. Someone wish to make that motion? We have a motion by Councilmember Farmer to that effect. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Brost. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Bertolino.
Rick, is there a possibility that that we only do the treatment this year and not do any removals, thus cutting about 50,000 out of that for this year, unless a tree is actually a nuisance and we believe that there's a liability? In other words, it's a safety issue for our citizens. Other than that, let's forestall the cutting and just do the treatments this year. And is there any, maybe you can ask our consultants, is there any real danger there in, accelerating the spread of the ash borer if we don't cut those diseased trees down?
Rick, do you have an answer for that?
I certainly think that is something we could consider, and I would ask Andy maybe to chime in on that. Obviously, we've got to be concerned about the safety of any trees that do die. So we would have to address those as they came about. Andy, are you available to speak to that?
Yes, and thank you for the question. I was actually pleased with the prices we removed for removals, whereas we can now remove all of the trees we had slated for removal in 5 years, rather than an 8-year time span that we had previously discussed when I was at your council workshop, I believe in February. So I would personally not like to see a gap in removals, only because we are right there in that bell curve where I think we're going to see an accelerated infestation where these trees are going to rapidly die. And by skipping a year of not removing 200 trees, I think we're going to see mass mortality in the next coming years. Therefore, we're going to be left with a lot more hazard trees and those liabilities. Now, I don't have any of that data to back me up, but it's just assumed that this year or next, we're going to start seeing high mortality rates with trees. So in this year, we were going to remove 190 of your trees in the worst condition, which would be the ones likely to die the quickest from infestation, which in that case, those 190 trees would be, you'd have that many dead trees due to this beetle.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Councilmember Bartoni?
Thank you. So I'm one of the residents that's lucky enough to have one of these ash trees in my front yard. and it's looked pretty bad here for a while. So I don't know if my question is for Rick or our guest, but I actually had somebody come out probably 2 or 3 years ago and looked at it. And we discussed treatment and cutting it down and replacing it. His answer surprised me because he's a guy in the business to make money. And he told me that the treatment process is less than 50% successful. So how do you determine which trees are going to be treated and which ones aren't? I guess it's probably maybe like the length, maybe the disease has been put in it, but or has been in the tree. But if there's X number of trees that are going to be proposed to be treated, I can't remember that number off the top of my head, but I think it was like close to a couple hundred or something.
394.
Okay, so close to 400. How did you determine which 400 to treat and which 400 needed to be, replaced?
Well, it's 394 proposed to be treated, 942 to be removed and replaced. The 394 trees we elected to have treated were based on certain criteria. That was size class of 15-inch diameter to 24-inch diameter. And these were in deemed good condition by our inventorying arborists, meaning they had good full canopies, good root systems, good stems. All their assessments showed that they were in good condition. So again, it was based on the size class of the diameter, being a middle-aged tree that will provide benefits for many, many years to come, and they were already in good condition.
Okay, so that takes me to the next question is, so we decide to treat 394 trees and they have to be treated in every 2 years, and 2 years from now, 50 of those 400 trees took a turn for the worse and now need to be cut down, and a year after that, it's another 100. I mean, what kind of guarantee is there on the treatment?
This product, Emerald ash borer got introduced in the United States in 2002, and they've developed, they're getting better with their technologies in these products. And we are now on a product that I can't say with anything living that I can't give you a 100% guarantee, but as long as the product that I specified is used, which it will be, and if it's administered correctly, which I will ensure it is, the succession rate is very, very good, greater than 90%. That 50% number of success is incorrect. That may have been some observations made from malpractice being used, but as long as everything is done correctly, the success rate is very good. And even if the borer is in the tree, which it likely will be at time of treatment, it will knock that borer out of the tree.
Okay, so that's great, but what is the guarantee that your company gives?
I am just simply the consultant. The contractor we'd be using for 2020 would be Arbor Masters. They wouldn't provide any type of guarantee of survivability. Again, just being a living thing, there's no one that's going to provide that type of guarantee. But I can just tell you as the consultant and with the contractor we're electing to go with based on their methodology they're going to use and the product they're going to use, I am confident we would have a good success rate. Of course, over time, some of these trees would naturally decline, not because of emerald ash borer, but other environmental conditions. So that 394 number would decrease over time naturally, but I'm confident in the treatments for emerald ash borer.
Well, I mean, and that's great, but I mean, without some sort of a guarantee, I'm going to have problems supporting this part of it. I was actually kind of thinking the opposite of what Dave was thinking earlier. I was thinking that we just pull the treatment part out of this proposal and cut down and replace more trees. My tree might be past a certain stage that some of the other ones are looking at, and maybe that's why he was telling me that a 50% success rate would be would be my situation. But, I had two people look at it. They both gave me the same answer. And one of those companies is one that we got a proposal from. So, I mean, I can't support treating these without being with some sort of a guarantee that we are going to, I understand that a tree's going to die eventually someday, that it's a living item, but if it's going to die in 4 years from, this beetle infestation, then there should be some sort of a recourse for our city. Thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Edens.
Yes, as the memo stated, there were multiple options given to admin and public works. And sometimes on committees or in council, you've all experienced it. You try to do the best with the information you have, and you're often operating in that gray area because there's not necessarily a right or wrong with that black or white. So you're looking somewhere in between. And that's where we landed with a combination of approaches. And part of the reason that we did this is because, you don't want to throw good money, so to speak, after bad trees. But part of the thought process was because initially, affording and budgeting for removal of every ash tree and replanting was not a good option on the table. And so what that left with was removal and then a huge gap in replanting all across the board. And most residents, based on feedback we've gotten when we've removed trees in other areas, especially even in Ward 5, are really unhappy to find all of their street trees cut down en masse. So part of the thought process was this would kind of placate some of that resident concerns. The other thing is, as you're staggering replacements, you're also staggering the sizes of trees that are planted. They're all going to be smaller, of course, than what's planted, but when you're planting 2 and 3 years apart, you're going to have a little bit more natural variation. And of course, treating is indefinite. It's not a cure, so that's not a great long-term solution anyway. So I just wanted to provide some background of how we ended up with this kind of piecemeal solution. I mean, if I could wave a wand and replant them all at once, I would. But if I thought that the ash borers would also be abated in 5 years, maybe then I would love for that process to continue with treatment. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound like it will. Every tree will likely be infected in the state. So that is how we got to the state of where we're being, which is why I'm going to support it, because it's kind of the best of the not great options.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy.
So I just have a couple questions for the gentleman. Dr. Gragnani might appreciate this. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd be asking for the prognosis for a couple trees over the next 60 days. But I'm going to ask a question to the gentleman. Is there any temporality to doing this today versus the difference of waiting 30 to 60 days so we could better understand the climate of where things may sit? Because I think we're actually going to, I think we're going to have a lot more information in 30 to 60 days over the current epidemic in this region. And so I would like to know, is there a timing of the year that you have to do it? Or is this something that you could address in 60 days? And then I'm going to follow this up with a motion based off his answer, if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Mr. Burt?
Yeah, that is, well, 30 days, certainly. There is a window of time. It's after full leaf expansion, which with ash trees we'll find mid-May, and we'll have to discontinue treatments by the end of July. Mid-August is really the best time to effectively get the product into the tree. Now, the company we're going with is out of Kansas City, so they're going to be mobilizing workers over here. So I think they're going to be able to effectively do all the treatments in a timely manner. Again, the process it takes for you all to approve and then contract the company out, I'm not sure what that timeline would be. So I can't give you a definitive answer on the 60 days. I think 30 days could be a realistic number, but we are looking at 2.5 month window of the year when we can effectively do the treatments.
So based on that, and I have great appreciation for Mr. Brown's comments about the money that's been allocated for this, and great respect for Ms. Councilmember Jordan's article that she presented yesterday. I'd like to make a motion to postpone this for 45 days to allow us to get better clarification of what the current economic and budgetary discretions may look in part, or the ramifications of some of the sales tax. I'd like to postpone for 45 days and come back to the exact same vote.
Okay, so we have a motion to postpone for 45 days, seconded by Councilmember Gragnani. Is there any discussion on the motion to postpone for 45 days? Seeing no discussion, Ms. Lobeck, please call the roll for postponement of the main motion for 45 days.
Councilmember Bo. Councilmember Bo.
She has distortion in her microphone.
Councilmember Bo.
How do you vote?
Yes.
Say it loud.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Remy.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
No.
Councilmember Gross.
Yes.
Councilmember Garrett.
Yes.
Councilmember Werther.
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Dillard.
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
Councilmember Gregnani.
Yes,
Councilmember Stevens.
Yes.
Councilmember McCune.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion to postpone passes, and that takes us to miscellaneous. We have one item from Councilmember Remy, which is a COVID-19 update. We are at 5 minutes after 7, so if there's no objection, I would ask that we recess the work session and come back to that item after the main meeting. And what's the pleasure of the council? Do you need to move right into our next meeting, or do you want to take a couple of minutes for a break?
Let's move ahead.
Move ahead. All right. So that's any objection to moving ahead?
Just a point of information, we stay on the same link, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so without objection, that's what we will do. I want to call to, and is there any objection to recessing the work session? I'm sorry. All right, seeing no objection. Moving into the main meeting of the council, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, April 13, 2020. Ms. Lobeck, would you please call the roll? Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Here.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Bo. Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Here.
Councilmember Remy.
Present.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Brost.
Here.
Councilmember Garitano.
Present.
Councilmember Werther.
Present.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon. Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Councilmember Dillard.
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Here.
Councilmember Gregnani.
here.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. Again, for those of you that are just joining us, that were not part of our work session, we're obviously doing things a little differently this evening. I'm coming to you from our City Hall with some of our city team members, our city administrator, Sam Ansom, our Director of Planning and Parks, Joe Vinich, and our city attorney and our Deputy City Clerk, Colleen Lobeck. And I want to thank them for being with us this evening and getting all of this in order for us so we could have this meeting in this format to keep our city going forward for our residents. And thanks to all of you council members for joining. Also, I want to mention for the first time, we have 2 student interpreters with us this evening that are doing their sign language interpretation for those who may be watching that are hearing impaired. And we really appreciate having them with us this evening as well. What we're going to do, just as a matter of housekeeping and logistics, we will have public participation and we also have a public hearing. At that time, anyone who may be joining us that wishes to speak, if you want to raise your hand through Zoom or otherwise let us know that you wish to speak, we'll call on you and I'll read some instructions about that momentarily. Otherwise, it will be a meeting where the council will be speaking. And with that, next on our list is the Pledge of Allegiance. And for those of you who are comfortably able, if you'd please stand with me to say our Pledge of Allegiance. pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
For
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. And moving next to approval of minutes from the council's March 23rd, 2020 work session and regular meeting. If there are no comments to those, I would entertain a motion to approve them. Motion to approve by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Grost. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve the minutes? Seeing no discussion, Ms. Lobeck, please call the roll for approval of the minutes from the March 23rd, 2020 work session and meeting of the council.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember Kuhn,
Yes.
Councilmember Bope, Councilmember Bope,
Oh,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Werther,
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Dillard,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Grignani.
Abstain.
Okay, thank you. The motion carries. Moving next to public participation. Do we have anyone wishing to speak at this point? We have no hands raised. Okay, so I will move past the instructions and comments for that. Moving next to mayor announcements. Just real quickly, I want to mention, as you know, members of the council, I sent an email last week relative to getting temporary provisional service to some of our key areas in rural wards for high-speed internet, given the current situation where many of them, even more than usual, frankly, are working and studying from home. And I just want to let you know that I'll have, that is still, and we're still in the process of looking at all the data and the statistics as to how best to go about it in the key areas. And I will have a more detailed report to you at the next meeting. That report may come with a request for some nominal additional funding, but that's where it is as we sit here today. Moving next to public hearings, PZ 1119, sorry, PZ 1119. Ms. Lobeck, would you please read that?
PZ 11-19, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission in care of the Department of Planning, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request to review section 415.030 definitions, section 415-400 sign regulations general, section 415-410 sign regulations for FP, PS, NU in all R districts, section 415.420 sign regulations for all C and M districts, section 415.430 subdivision information signs, and section 415.440 temporary signs, specifically for the purposes of considering possible changes to certain existing regulations to address comments and concerns from members of the public regarding their timeliness and applicability, and to review recent relevant legal developments regarding the same.
Thank you. Joe, do you have any information you would like to share with the council, and then let the council know what you're requesting this evening, please?
Yes, sir, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the Planning and Zoning Commission has provided for your consideration tonight a letter of recommendation regarding the city's sign regulations. These regulations over the course of time have been discussed many times, and signage can be a very appropriate thing to spur information about location, to promote business, and to achieve other goals. Besides that, however, signs can become cluttered and affect the safety of the public and the aesthetic character of a community. In June of 2015, the United States Supreme Court handed down a landmark decision relating to sign regulations as it affects local governments. The key component of that decision by the United States Supreme Court was that signs had to be content neutral, meaning that you could not tell what the sign is for by its name. The city of Wildwood began a process approximately 2 years ago to address this particular decision by the United States Supreme Court and to address other considerations that had arisen locally relative to elections. The Planning and Zoning Commission began this process in June of 2019, approximately 1 year ago. The Planning and Zoning Commission not only held a public hearing, but numerous work sessions. The outcome of that process is the document that is before you tonight, along with the amended sign regulations. The city attorney was integral in creating these changes, but also importantly, by creating the changes, the city attorney and the Department of Planning retained the general format of the sign regulations, something that the department felt was critical. At the conclusion of the discussion at the Planning and Zoning Commission, the members voted unanimously to support the recommended changes as presented tonight. There are numerous ones. The department just wants to highlight a couple. First and foremost, the language now is content neutral. It talks about monument signs, flat signs, temporary signs, with words like business, informational, directional, no longer would exist in our sign regulations. Secondly, and probably most importantly, it addresses the issue of political signs and concerns that our current regulations have caused in that particular regard. I think City Attorney Young walked a nice tightrope to create something that is consistent with case law, as well as the aforementioned decision by this United States Supreme Court. Finally, and in the opinion of the department, most importantly in many regards, the city retains the right to control its right-of-ways and public lands, meaning that at the end of the day, those areas can be enforced, can be controlled, and ultimately protected to the benefit of public safety. Signage in the public right-of-way can create sight distance considerations, distractions, and other concerns relating to the driving public. At the conclusion of the process, I believe the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, two of which are the mayor and Councilmember Werther, would say that it was a thorough, a long process, but a successful one. And tonight, the department is presenting the action of the Planning and Zoning Commission and requesting from the City Council the right to prepare the legislation to proceed forward with the adoption of the amended sign regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Do we have anyone, I guess, by Zoom wishing to speak? Okay, and we have no one in the audience here at City Hall. So, Council, does anyone wish to make a motion as requested by our Director of Planning and Parks, Councilmember McCune? Makes that motion. We have a second by Councilmember, I'm sorry, will you make a motion, Councilmember McCune?
No, No, I wasn't. I just had one question with all of the material. Where does the school district fall in when they put the signs in their fencing?
That's a very good question, Councilmember McEwen, and it came late in our process. But if you look, I believe somewhere around page 31 or 32 in the actual proposed regulations, we made those signs more like a site plan submittal. And so not to prohibit them, but to put them through extra scrutiny under the umbrella of a true community benefit. So someone wanting to install banners like at Lafayette High School's track, these signs that are some type of cup or other material in the fencing, they would have to submit a proposal to the Planning and Zoning Commission for review and action.
So just as a follow-up to that, then with that review process, I guess you have to put into place, or is this not new? How long would a process like that take for them?
The process, for all intents and purposes, mirrored the site development plan review process, which is already in place. And so I think we could be ready to go as soon as the regulations are in place. Typically, a site plan takes 2 meetings. I'm thinking in this particular case, depending on the extent or complexity of the sign package, it could be a meeting at the very most, or 2 meetings if it's complex or there are requests for modifications.
Okay, that's my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Bodwell. Were you making the motion?
No, I was making, I had a question for Joe, if possible.
Sure, go ahead.
Joe, can you delineate the use of LED signage? I read through this, but I think for public who may be listening in, it would be helpful if you would delineate what those new regulations are.
It's a very good question, and thank you, Councilmember Dodwell. The proposed regulations for signage does not include any type of electronic message board that utilizes the light emitting diodes, the LEDs. What the code does, the new regulations do, is it does allow LED lighting for traditional signage illumination. And for the most part, 99% of our existing signs use LEDs. We were just kind of catching up to the industry.
Councilmember Stevens.
Yes, question for Mr. Young. So in Joe's presentation, he had mentioned other issues regarding elections and political signs. So under these guidelines, is it legal to hold a political sign on a sidewalk in Wildwood?
There's nothing in the current draft that has been presented to you that would prohibit that.
Okay, and has it always been this way, or was there a change? Like, where is the change, if there is any, in the draft?
Well, in terms of any past, because of matters that are ongoing, I'm not going to get into that in a public setting, but I will say to you that the specific language that discusses right-of-way limitations is set forth on page, bear with me just a moment. It is on page 35, and that addresses signage in public property.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, Councilor McHugh.
One more. Joe, under section, I guess the subdivision signs, I had a question on the sizing. Obviously, Lake Chesterfield exceeds what's currently written. I know that there's probably a grandfather clause that we have that kind of bring us into where we're at. But if we would go to change that, we would have to do some major renovations to come compliant with the new code. So I'm just a little concerned on why was there a change to the single monument sign with the 50 square feet in total size?
Councilmember McCune, the change actually allowed a single monument type sign for subdivision entries. Currently, our code requires or limits to 2 signs, each being 25 square feet in size. Oftentimes, the department over the course of the last number of years has been asked for just a single sign, and we often have to take those requests to the Board of Adjustment. So the Planning and Zoning Commission was clear, if there's an existing single sign and they want to replace it, they can now do it without going to the Board of Adjustment.
Okay,
If-
so I think I read it wrong. So you clarified with what I was reading, because I was just a little concerned on what we would have to do on our side.
I'll check the language to make sure it wasn't confusing before you get the actual legislation if the motion's approved tonight.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Councilmember Grignani?
Yes, do you have the motion yet or not?
We do not.
Then I will make the motion to prepare the necessary legislation to adopt these sign ordinance changes.
Thank you. And I see a second from Councilmember Dodwell. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, this is a motion to prepare the necessary legislation. Ms. Lobeck, please call the roll for the motion.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Bope, Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Werther,
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
Sorry, we didn't hear.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Councilmember,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Dillard,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Grignani,
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you, and thank you, Joe. Moving next into legislation, we have no second readings. We have 3 first readings. The first is Bill 2550, and it is before the council concerning all wards. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Dodwell. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember McCutcheon. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed by show of hands? Please raise your hand if you are opposed. Seeing none, please raise your hand if you abstain. Seeing no abstentions, Ms. Lobeck, please read Bill 2550.
Bill 2550, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, to submit on behalf of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, an application with the St. Louis County Department of Planning for 2021 Community Development Block Grant Funds, CDBG, and authorizing the mayor of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, to execute the Municipal Housing and Community Development Supplemental Cooperation Agreement.
Okay, thank you. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to mention additionally relative to Bill 2550?
Yes, sir. Just a few items with your permission. First and foremost, City Council members, this matter was presented at a public hearing on March 23rd of this year. The City Council authorized the preparation of legislation. The money that is allocated for 2021 will go to senior programming. And the best news probably regarding this matter, this is revenue positive, meaning we're getting the money, not spending it.
Okay, excellent. Any questions for Joe? Okay, seeing none, it will be on the agenda for the next meeting of the council. Moving to Bill 2551, it is also before the council for first reading, and it concerns wards 1 and 5. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Grignani, seconded by Councilmember Bertolino. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed by a show of hands? If you're opposed, please raise your hand. We have one opposed, Councilmember Werther. Any other opposed? we have any abstentions? So only one opposed, Councilmember Werther.
No, I was opposed.
I'm sorry, show of hands for those opposed, please. Councilmember Stevens is opposed, Councilmember Bartoni is opposed, Councilmember Werther is opposed, and Councilmember Edens is opposed. Any other opposed? By a show of hands. Any abstentions? By a show of hands. Seeing none, the motion carries. Ms. Lobeck, please read Bill 2551.
Bill 2551, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the current name of the Pond Grover Loop Road, inclusive of its entirety within this jurisdiction, to be renamed to Pond Grover Parkway, which is reflective of the city's park facilities that anchor either end of it, while in keeping with the naming protocols of the Office of Emergency Management, OEM, of St. Louis County, Missouri.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to mention relative to Bill 2551?
Again, Mr. Mayor, with your permission, just a couple of items. This particular matter was presented to the City Council at work session on March 23rd. At that presentation, the Department of Planning provided a report from the Planning and Parks Committee endorsing the name change. And as part of the name change, there is an expense relating to changing street signs to reflect the new name. The department estimated the cost in a conservative manner to be no more or less than $10,000.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Grignani.
Thank you. I have a question. If we were to, this is just the first reading, but if we were to pass this legislation for the name change, is it necessary to spend the money that's allocated for this, for the signage immediately, or can that be postponed?
I would ask Mr. Brown to respond to that question if he would.
Mr. Brown.
Yes, council member, having gone through this with regard to some other sign changes with MoDOT, it's not a quick process. We would have to engage with MoDOT, develop the signing plan, and then enter an agreement with them, install the signs, and then the dollar amount would be attached to that agreement, which would go through council. So it's a several month, if not longer process. Would not surprise me one bit if the expenditure actually ended up being in the next year, 2021, rather than 2020.
This involves MoDOT, as you said, is that correct?
Right.
Well, my suggestion, or my suspicion would be it will be the next century, so that answers my question.
Councilmember Edens.
Yeah, so when this came up before, the reason why I had abstained a couple of weeks ago wasn't the concept of having a roadside changed. It was when I looked at the attachment with the mock-up of the sign view. So I understand, it's the big green highway slate one, like before with the picture of the circular roundabout and the road name. And this wasn't an attachment this time, but my thought was, why would you not wait to fabricate the sign until you've confirmed what you want to name Community Park and you add the name for the new Pocket Park? Because this is ridiculous, but why would you not print that on the fabrication with directions and the park name under the street name? Because unless I remembered it wrong, didn't the markup have the picture of the roundabout with it?
Rick Brown, I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Well, certainly Rick can answer the question, I think, better than I, so I'll mute myself and let Rick take the.
Rick, would you like to respond to that?
I'm not sure I remember seeing a mock-up of signing, to be quite honest. I will say that MoDOT will typically sign for the roads. I don't expect so much that they will allow us to sign directly for the park. That might be signed a separate way and could be signed through wayfinding signage, which in my opinion should be coordinated with this new signing plan for the street. And we could certainly do that at that time, if that makes sense.
Okay, maybe I'm remembering. I just thought I saw maybe it was a picture of the current sign, which had the street name and the roundabout already on it with the arrow exits.
That's probably correct.
That's
And-
probably what it was. So so I pictured it as a replacement that was a carbon copy, except the street name change. So my thought was, if there's any way at the same time to put the two parks on the right and the left arrows, that would be what we would want to do if we can do it. So I'm not comfortable approving that until I can add that to it.
With
Essentially,
the mayor's permission,
go ahead,
I
Joe.
think the goal, Ms. Edens, is to try to eliminate that highway type signage that exists now on State Route 109 in conjunction with Pond Grover Loop Road. That signage obviously is out of character with the rest of the area and any other signage except that which is in association with State Route 100. So I think the question is, do we allow that type of signage to be replaced? And if not, can we get smaller signage plus wayfinding signage that achieves everyone's goal?
So right now we don't have an answer then to what it looks like. We're allocating the money first. Is that right then?
The allocation of the funds would come later as part of the process for the agenda. We have to put a budget impact or anticipated budget impact in the source. And so we've not designed the signage. We've not had a conversation with the Missouri Department of Transportation. And certainly all of that will come to committee and then city council before any money is even requested.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
All right, seeing no further comments or questions, Bill 2551 will be on the agenda for the next council meeting. Which brings us to the last of our first readings. It's Bill 2552. This concerns the appointment of our new city clerk and thereby affecting all wards. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Dodwell. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Farmer. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed by a show of hands, please? Any opposed by show of hands? Seeing none, any abstentions?
Abstain.
One abstention, Councilmember McCune. Any other abstentions? Ms. Lobeck, please read Bill 2552.
Bill 2552, an ordinance appointing Megan Eldridge to the office of city clerk for the city of Wildwood, Missouri, and establishing the compensation of the city clerk.
Okay, thank you. And just a couple of words of background here. This obviously concerns Ms. Megan Eldridge. She is with us this evening. If you want to stand in front of the podium there, the camera will capture you. In case any of you have any questions, I just want to mention a couple of things about the background as to how we got here tonight with her. First of all, this started with an extensive search, and that ultimately culminated in 2 rounds of interviews that were done by our city administrator, Mr. Anselm, and myself. And Megan was the clear choice. And so you were provided last week with her resume. I just want to mention a couple of things. She has a Bachelor of Science in 2 areas from William Woods University. The first is in communications, and the second is something very dear and near to Wildwood, equestrian science. She is also a deputy city clerk and paralegal for the city of Jefferson City, and she has previously been a deputy city clerk for the city of Columbia, 2 very large cities, as you know. So she is here with us this evening. If anyone has any questions, if not, I would ask the council to, given the situation with our meetings and the need to have a city clerk in place, to move forward with a second reading of the bill this evening. So does any member of the council have any questions for Ms. Aldridge? Or Ms. Aldridge, do you have anything you would like to say? Councilor McCune.
Okay, I'm unmuted. It's just to Mr. Anselm. I guess I want to ask you what stood out with this candidate versus the others that you've interviewed.
We don't see her. Bear with us just a moment, Councilor, or I'm sorry, yeah, Councilor McCune. And while he's doing that, I just want to mention this is a mayoral appointment. So the city administrator was there and had the ability to ask questions, obviously. But at the end of the day, it was my selection and not his, although I'm sure he's happy to give you his thoughts on that.
Sure.
We're trying
Well,
to
then,
okay, go ahead.
sure, then just let me clarify. I guess what's Sam's input on this, because he's going to have to work day to day with this individual. So I understand it's a mayoral appointment, but again, Sam's going to be the daily person. So I just want to get Sam's input on it and
Sure.
see if he agreed with the selection.
Absolutely. And we're just bear with us a moment. We're trying to get Megan to show up here for you.
She should be on the screen there. Or she will be. There we go. We had her on.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Sam, would you like to answer Councilmember McHugh's question?
Sure. No, I appreciate the mayor's invitation to sit in on the interview process for the city clerk position, given the fact that we will work closely together in terms of just preparing agendas and responding to public information requests. I was impressed with Megan's experience. Also impressed with her attitude and approach. I think she is going to fit in well with our team. We have a small team of employees, so it's important for me that they demonstrate the characteristics and the values that our organization of employees demonstrates, and I saw those in Megan.
Okay, that's all the questions I had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Dodwell?
Megan, why do you want to come to work here instead of stay in Jeff City or Columbia?
I think it should be.
So I've always been interested in kind of living somewhere else. I've grown up in Missouri. I have family who lives in the Wildwood area. I have friends who live in the Wildwood area.
Hold on.
We're
Bear
going
with
to have to give her a mic.
Sorry. So I grew up in mid-Missouri and I've always been interested in moving elsewhere. I have friends and family that live in the Wildwood area. So I thought this was a great opportunity to move somewhere and then also pursue my goal as being a city clerk.
And what do you think is the most important thing about being a city clerk?
Building a good relationship and having great communication skills with the mayor, the city council, city staff, and the public.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bertolino?
Yeah, welcome, Megan. Exactly what is equestrian science?
So it's kind of the study of teaching people to ride. The program involves kind of education and also kind of caring for horses. So developing lesson plans for teaching people with various skill sets from beginners to advanced.
All right. Thank you, Megan. Any other questions for Megan? All right, seeing none, would any member of the council wish to make a motion for a second reading on Bill 2552 this evening? Made by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Brost. Any discussion on the motion for second reading? Seeing no discussion, this will be a 2/3 vote. We'll do a voice vote and see where that goes. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed with a show of hands, please. If you're opposed, please show your hand. Seeing none, any abstentions? One abstention, Councilmember McHugh. And Councilmember Werther, are you abstaining as well? Yes, he is. Okay, so we have 2 abstentions, Councilmember McHugh, Councilmember Werther. Any other abstentions? And no opposed. All right, with that, Ms. Loback, we have the 2/3 needed. Please read Bill 2552.
City clerk for the city of Wildwood, Missouri, and establishing the compensation of the city clerk.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on Bill 2552? Seeing no discussion, Ms. Loback, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2552.
Councilmember Bope, Councilmember Bope,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Werther,
Abstain.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Dillard,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Greg Nani,
yes,
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune.
Abstain.
Okay, the bill passes. Bill 2552. Congratulations, Megan, and welcome to our team. Look forward to working with you. All right, that takes us to, we have no resolutions, nothing under miscellaneous. We need to go back to the work session. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn the main meeting of the council, made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Greg Nani. It's non-debatable. All in favor of the motion to adjourn the main meeting of the council, please say aye.
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 Any opposed with a show of hands? Any abstentions? Motion to adjourn the main meeting of the council passes. That takes us back to the work session. We had one item left. Councilmember Remy, if you wouldn't mind, would you please give us an update on the COVID-19 situation that is affecting all of us?
Sure. And just in full disclosure, I didn't put myself on the agenda. I got asked to talk. So
You were nominated to do that by Councilmember Edens. I thought this was a great idea. So without objection, go ahead, Dr. Remy.
Sure. So over the past couple of weeks, I could just take a step back and let folks know what I do. So I've been taking care of patients now for 21 days in our COVID units at Children's and at Barnes and Missouri Baptist and Barnes St. Peter's. And you know, over the last couple of weeks, the interesting thing, just to give you an insider of what's going on, at least at Barnes and at Mercy and from SLU from Friends, is that there was wisdom right at the beginning of this to cancel elective surgeries. And frankly, our numbers at all of these hospitals of current census has been way down. And that's afforded us in a lot of ways to be able to take care of an increase in number of patients that have been admitted with COVID. So as of right now, just the most up-to-date numbers that I just got from the task force, St. Louis, the city has 652 cases, 19 deaths. The county has 1687 with 50 deaths. St. Charles has got 385 with 14 deaths. St. Clair County has 202 with 10 deaths. Over the total for that is 93 deaths for 2,926 patients or people that have tested positive. What's most interesting, I think, is, you know, when I looked at this a couple weeks ago and gave some insight to this, I think this is quite interesting. And I'm just going to share a picture for y'all, which is the state of, so what you're looking at here is a picture of the state of Missouri in comparison to, say, the state of New York. And this is after the first 100 cases. And this is days since the first 100 case. You're looking at numbers here. And of course, for Missouri, we've actually been flattening. And in this region especially, we've actually plateaued. And in fact, we've been sitting at this plateau now for about 10 days. Now, I've heard from a number of individuals thinking that we're going to surge around the 19th through the 25th. And I'm not sure that that's true. I think what we're going to see is, I think we're going to sit at this plateau for a long period of time. And it's going to just be a slow, consistent number of cases that come in. And then eventually we'll start to decline. The number of, and this you're looking at here is number of patients in the intensive care unit, and this is all comers or all cases. What's interesting too, over the past week, and I've confirmed these with colleagues at other hospitals here, is that our number of cases on ventilators has drastically decreased. Now, I want to say this with a caveat that it doesn't negate the fact that, you know, over the past 2 weeks, I've put breathing tubes in dads and sons, and
we're seeing people in their 40s and young 50s who really have very low comorbidities die pretty rapidly. But clear, far and away, the majority of all cases, well greater than 85 to 90%, are very mild cases, and most folks are not getting hospitalized. So I think that what we're seeing is that we're going to sit at this plateau for at least the next couple of weeks. I think we'll get some further clarity by the middle of May. And I think at that point, I think we're going to start hitting the decline from that plateau pretty dramatically. And the big concern is whether or not we're going to have a second small peak, given the fact that some relaxation on some of the social distancing measures may change. So that's at least what I'm seeing. Very rare in children. So we've only had a few cases of children in this area that have been positive. Our children's intensive care units, at least at Wash U, have taken care of adults within the pediatric ICU. And furthermore, the number of cases that are getting admitted, many of those individuals are getting admitted, and many of them are getting ruled out pretty quickly. Now, there is a low sensitivity of the test, meaning that we'll test you and you actually are positive, but the test is either has some operator dependency to it. And so with a bad sample, or there's the confines of providing the test, some folks do get missed. So we are careful to make sure that the public understands that if you've got symptoms and a negative test doesn't mean that you may not be positive for novel coronavirus 19. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy, for that update. We appreciate it. Councilmember Greg Nani.
You had to know I'd ask the question, right?
Yeah,
I don't want to talk shop here with these guys because we'll lose them, but I got a couple questions for you, Ken. First of all, knowing that we're hiding everybody from the virus right now, which is a good thing, really. We're not developing herd immunity.
Right.
This virus. And so if we turn everybody loose again, any speculation on what will happen?
Well, it's a great question. So I think there's two things here. So the other hat that I wear is many of these patients, I've been getting blood samples in real time and following these patients temporally over 2.5 weeks to look at the status of their immune system. And then in my lab, we expose their immune cells to different tests, different therapies, including hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir, interleukin-7, tocilizumab, and a number of different agents. The answer to your question, Dr. Gragnani, is I think there's two things at play. I think that maintaining social distancing not only minimizes the spread, it certainly flattens a curve so that we don't continue to increase capacity at local hospitals. But the other thing that I think no one talks about is that it allows us to find more time to develop the best therapeutics. And so it's certainly reasonable to think that, as you mentioned, that we'll have a lack of herd immunity. However, I think that we may have therapies that when you do become positive and rapidly progress to acute lung injury and or acute kidney injury and distributive shock, that we have therapies that we could provide to you pretty quickly, including remdesivir, which at least in compassionate use in New England Journal of Medicine over the weekend, demonstrated almost a 70% improvement, at least in viremia. And so I think that that'll be helpful. But you're absolutely right. There's no doubt that there will be a spike just naturally. We're fortunate that we're not New York City, and it pains me to say to my hometown, their density in Manhattan is so much higher than it is here. This is why they've not flattened. But we're getting there. We're actually doing quite well. I mean, in St. Louis County, we account for 40% of all deaths in the state, but our deaths have actually been slowing. So that's at least optimistic towards how we go forward. Yes, Dr. Gragnani.
Yes, the second question is in reference to the particular problem. I have an article, and I'll talk to you about this offline later if you want, but
sure.
The cytokine storm, which has been designed and or been described in the past and probably was part of the disease back in 1918 as well. Of course, I didn't have the knowledge and the treatments that we have available today. I assume that the medical profession locally is aware of that, and you're treating with anti-inflammatories for people who show any signs of hyperimmune response?
You are bringing up a huge debate, and the reason why it's a debate is because some patients demonstrate a hyperinflammatory state where they have pretty robust increases in their interleukin-6, their TNF-alpha, their IL-1RAs. Those are the patients that a lot of individuals across the world are considering them for drugs like tocilizumab, which is an anti-inflammatory medicine, or anakinra. And what the hope is that if you knock down that hyperinflammatory state, what you'll actually do is you'll actually mitigate some of the inflammatory damage that's happening, at least at the level of the lung alveoli blood membrane. The problem with that is that if you give an anti-inflammatory, and we've known this for sepsis for 50 years, is that when you've got an active infection like a virus, if you actually decrease inflammation, you then get unmitigated or unbridled viremia, perhaps, and that's problematic. So you're suppressing, but you're not actually giving an antiviral therapy, which is where remdesivir is actually kind of interesting to use, because you could at least control for some of that. So what we've been doing, and I've got a clinical trial that's ongoing right now in Brussels and in Spain and in France and in Italy, and also we'll be starting an MSK in next week. We thought it would be this week, but we waited a week for the trial rather than compassionate use, is that we're actually advocating for utilization for some patients that demonstrate hyperinflammation, to give them a suppressive medicine or an anti-inflammatory, give them that antiviral medication, and then we boost back their immune system with something like interleukin-7 or a checkpoint inhibitor like nivolumab, so that then their host immunity can actually then fight off any subsequent secondary infections.
That makes sense. This article, and I'll talk to you about, if you call me after we get offline, I'll tell you about this article. Was studied extensively back in 2009 with the H1N1 in China.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Councilmember Edens.
Thank you. I hope there's not a quiz later, but I did follow most of that. Taking it back to Wildwood locally, one of the questions that I've had and also my residents have had is, besides following the rules and self-quarantining and social distancing, is what else can we do to help the medical community or folks that are in necessary working conditions? Do you have the PPE you need? My friend that's a surgical nurse in St. Louis did not get her N95 until Thursday. She's got it for 5 shifts between sanitation. I mean, not that it's the same quality. Do you want us to make masks and drop them off someplace? Is it not effective? I mean, is there anything that our residents can do to help our medical system?
So to be honest with you, I am unaware of any medical system in this area that's having difficulties obtaining PPE or having enough PPE for their staff. The problem is that the allocation of that PPE within the hospital is the problem. And so because it's under lock and key, the distribution to different people is a problem. And then so the biggest problem for PPE right now is not terribly the N95 masks or PAPRs or CPAPers or even gowns or gloves. It's actually just surgical masks. And the reason for that is because we wear them all the time in the hospital. And when you take it off, it's hard to get another one. That's the biggest thing. We have a lot of them at our hospital at BJC, and I'm unfamiliar with the same problems at SLU. At least I've not heard, at least from the task force, that there's been a problem. But it's a distribution within the medical system itself to give it to the employees. So I don't know. I mean, I think if you want to make masks and give them to hospital personnel, that's a great idea. That's not been the big issue that I've seen. I'll give you a different perspective, and I don't want to sadden anyone here, but one of the great things I do in at least my job, and maybe John can speak to this from his career, is I became an intensive care doctor because I like taking care of really sick people, and I enjoy the ability to hopefully recover patients, and when they're going to die, provide them at least the ability to have some dignity and peace at the end of their life. And one of the things that COVID has robbed us all from is having family members at the bedside when they die. It's really sad. And I can't express how disheartening it is to see someone die without their family members in the room, in the presence of someone holding their hand that's at least someone who knows them. And so one of the things that I've been advocating for, and maybe this is something Wildwood could consider, is considering if there's an opportunity for people to get rid of their old iPads, is the ability to provide real-time FaceTime, just so family members can at least be there and sing to their loved ones and talk to them, I think would at least provide a little bit more dignity than unfortunately what currently patients are enduring. And it's not certainly because nurses and therapists and social workers and doctors are unable to provide that. We just don't have, a couple hundred iPads to just station one in a room. And given the transmission of the disease, that's one of the rate limiting steps. And so I don't know if this is an opportunity for us to create a drive in Wildwood for people to give and then donate to local hospitals. But I think if every room in this area for their COVID unit had a device that we could use, at least that would be something that would provide some folks that dignity.
Councilmember Garitano.
Thank you for your work.
Ken and all the healthcare professionals, I greatly appreciate. I'm sure everyone here is on board with supporting you in any way. So thank you for everything that you and all the healthcare professionals are doing to combat this. I just wanted to recognize our student interpreters, especially after all the medical terms that Dr. Remy just brought up, for really keeping up with this. And it's just awesome to have them here. And I hope that we can continue to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Garitano. And thank you again, Councilmember Remy, for your excellent update. And Councilmember Regnani for your questions. And Councilmember Edens. All right, anything else under miscellaneous? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Bartoni.
Thank you. To try to end this on a little happier note, I got a call from a resident today. A friend of mine lives over in Ward 8 in Cherry Hills, and just wanted to thank us for still having the trails and the bike trails open. He understands the parking lots being closed. It's a little bit more inconvenient, but the fact that he took the time to call me to thank me and to thank the city for having those open, I wanted to pass that on to everybody.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Bartoni. And I will just tell you that that was, without getting into all of the details of those discussions that I had with our city administrator, our director of planning and parks, and our police captain, a balancing of the interests to do the best thing, I thought, in the circumstances. So glad to hear that. Councilor Dodwell, did I see your hand?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say thank you to our city administrator and all of our staff for so rapidly looking at alternatives for the city council to be able to have this meeting tonight, be able to find a forum to communicate in effectively. I know our last meeting was a little touch and go, but you guys have done a yeoman's job of making sure our staff is safe, making sure that our meetings are still held, making sure that we're still doing the business of the city, and also putting a lot of things online. So I just want to applaud you guys on what's occurred over the last 3 weeks from the city staff. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you all.
Councilmember Regnani.
Yeah, quick comment to Ken. Ken, I'm going to email you an attachment with a PDF file from that article, so you'll have it.
Councilmember Remy.
So I actually will just echo some of the same sentiments. I will just say, and I don't mean to just be so philosophical, but in these times of uncertainty and sadness and seeing young people die, we've got 29 people on this call, and yes, we are a functional, dysfunctional family at times, but I am so happy to see everybody on this call and really wish everybody remains and stays safe, because doing this together is what makes our community strong. I strongly believe that, because I don't want to see anybody pop off this call from something related to this disease.
Thank you. Director Vintage.
With the permission of City Council, I would like to thank Julian. He's kind of managing all the different parts tonight. I think he did an excellent job.
I agree. And I want to echo the thanks to them and also to our interpreters. There's nothing further. I would entertain a motion to adjourn our work session. Made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Regnani. Non-debatable. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed by a show of hands? See no opposed, any abstentions? So our work session is adjourned. Thank you. Stay safe. Appreciate all of your service and have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.